Hi everyone, this is Talia Argandesi, the Director of the Center for Writing and Speaking at Ursinus College. I'm here to take a couple minutes to talk to you about revising and perfecting your thesis statement. Ideally, you already have a draft of your paper or at least a draft of your thesis statement that you have in mind, and we're going to walk through some steps for thinking about what could make it better. So just a reminder, your first paragraph, your introduction, should include these three things: a hook to interest your reader, sometimes thought of as an attention grabber, just something that will be immediately interesting to any reader, and that can be relatively short. You also want to spend some time in your introduction giving your reader a sense of the intellectual stakes of the essay. So by intellectual stakes of the essay, think about these questions: what problems will be considered, and what conversation or debate is this essay entering? Basically, this is the context of your argument. And then finally, you need to include a thesis statement. It's usually the last sentence of your first paragraph. We'll spend our time today talking about the thesis statement. And let's start by looking at some examples. So in the left-hand column, we have some examples of weak thesis statements. This paper will compare and contrast two pizza places. Peppers and Amante are similar in some ways and different in others. And Peppers and Amante are similar in many ways, but they have one major difference. Contrast those bad examples with the one on the right. Peppers and Amante both offer a greater variety of ingredients than other Chapel Hill Carborough pizza places and than any of the national chains. But the funky, lively atmosphere at Peppers makes it a better place to give visiting friends and family a taste of local culture. This one on the right is better because, or for many reasons, it gives more detail, more specificity. It gives the reader a strong sense of what the paper is going to be about. It takes a stand. You can tell that the author is going to be arguing that Peppers is a better pizza place than Amante, and taking a stand like that makes the essay seem more enticing, more interesting to read, which is one of your goals for your thesis statement. It's narrow enough to handle in a relatively short paper. It's clear what they're arguing, and it's concise. It's only one sentence, even though it's packed with so much information. The ones on the left, on the other hand, are just a bit too vague and too broad. The first one doesn't even specify what pizza places will be compared and contrasted, and the second two are set up like thesis statements, but they don't give enough information that the reader knows what the paper is going to be about or is enticed in any way to read it. And none of these ones on the left-hand side take a stand. No reasonable person could disagree with any of these thesis statements. So if you want to see whether your thesis statement is sort of doing the good things that the right-hand column thesis statements did, think about this as a checklist. First of all, it should be concise. I wouldn't go more than 2 sentences, and for a short paper like a CIE paper, 1 sentence is probably plenty. It needs to be clear. Obviously, every sentence in your paper does need to be clear, but your thesis statement in particular is sometimes difficult to make clear because you have a lot of information in it. It's a sentence that's carrying a lot of weight. But you need even someone who hasn't read your whole argument to be able to understand what you're getting at. A thesis statement should be specific. Some people think that because it's the introduction, you shouldn't give anything away. But the fact is, in American academic discourse, you are supposed to be very specific in the first paragraph and show exactly what you're going to be arguing. So avoid any vague generalities and make sure you show what the essay is going to be about. Your reader wants to know that going into your body paragraphs. Your thesis statement should be debatable. The way you can test whether your thesis statement is debatable is just a simple question: could a person reasonably disagree with this thesis statement? You want your thesis statement to be able to be disagreed with. If everyone would agree, it's a sign that it's not a good thesis statement. It doesn't justify writing a whole essay about. And finally, maybe most importantly, it needs to be interesting. Again, you want every sentence to be interesting in your paper, but your thesis statement especially. You should aim for it to be a little bit unexpected. You want it to push past the obvious, and you want it to be insightful. You should have a worksheet that accompanies this PowerPoint, and what I'd like you to do is pause now for a moment and do exercises 1 and 2. I want to leave this board up for a second because exercise 1 is just what are the qualities of a good thesis statement. And exercise 2 asks you to look at some sample thesis statements and explain why one is better than the other. So pause the video and do those exercises now. Since it's so important for your thesis statement to be interesting and insightful, we're going to spend a couple minutes thinking about how can you make a thesis statement insightful and interesting. And I should warn you that exercise 3 on the worksheet is just strategy, what are strategies for infusing your thesis statement with insight. So be sure to take notes as we go. So one thing to keep in mind, you can try to point out a similarity between two things that seem really different at first. So you can pause the video and read the examples on the right-hand side that are for imaginary essays. But the idea is, if you see two things that seem different, pointing out a similarity is a way to be insightful. Another thing, sort of the inverse of that, point out a key difference between things that seem similar. So if you want, pause the video for a minute and read the examples on the right side. But if you see things that seem like they're the same, you can be insightful by saying what's actually different about them. A third strategy is to point out an underlying assumption or unproven premise. So if something has more underneath it than it originally appears, or if an idea is resting on another idea that might not be true, you can talk about that in your thesis statement and use that as the basis of your essay. That's very insightful. So you can pause the video and read the examples if you want. And a fourth strategy is, and this is sort of a catch-all because all insight does something like this. Point out something that is true and accurate, but that others would not necessarily think of. Or seek ideas that are not immediately apparent but emerge only after deep reflection. So insight is basically, this is one of the strategies, but all insight is basically doing these things. Pointing out something that other people don't notice, or pointing out something that's not on the surface but is the product of deeper thought. So if you want, you can pause the video and read the examples on the right-hand side. You also might want to pause just to look back and take some notes and write down answers to exercise 3. Okay, one last exercise. I'm going to think about, imagine you had a friend who was writing a paper and they came up with a thesis statement like this. This essay will address representations of gender in the matrix and media. Think for a second, what would you tell your friend? How, based on what we've already said, how should they improve this thesis statement? Probably they should say which representations of gender they're going to be talking about, so they should be more specific. And they should say what is the meaning or the significance of those representations of gender, so that they take more of a stand and show what the essay will be about. Imagine they came to you with one like this. Gender is represented in the matrix and media in some similar, but in some different ways. This one is better than the first one, but it would be much stronger if the student specified what the similar and different ways are and talked about what the meaning or significance of those different representations was. So imagine this thesis statement. Although they are very different sorts of texts, the matrix and media show ambivalent and frequently negative attitudes toward women. This is better because it specifies what the attitude of the two texts are toward women, but it probably could be improved by either specifying how the texts are different, or maybe by taking this out because it doesn't have much substance, and instead focusing on what the meaning of the negativity is. So this one too needs to be more specific and to take more of a stand. Finally, imagine this thesis statement. Both the Matrix and Medea suggest that women are inferior to men, but they differ in what they think men's roles in society should be. The first half of the sentence does take a bit of a stand by interpreting those two texts and saying that they both show inferiority. But the second half of the sentence probably could be made even more specific. What do the texts, in what ways do the texts differ? What roles does one suggest, and what roles does the other suggest? So this is getting better, but still needs to be more specific. So here's an example of a strong thesis statement. Medea represents women in a more positive way than the Matrix, because Medea shows autonomy and independence, while Trinity merely provides support to the dominant men around her. This gives detail, it shows what the essay will be about. It's debatable because some people would disagree with this interpretation. And it's specific enough. It's not broad generalities. You know where the essay is going. So take a minute now to pause for exercise 4. Exercise 4 is just to take everything we've learned in this video so far and apply it to your own provisional thesis statement. Finally, I want to remind you about the Center for Writing and Speaking. That's Ursinus students' resource for help and advice with any papers or oral presentations you're working on for any class. If you go to this website, you can make an appointment with a writing fellow who will sit down with you for up to an hour and give you just some feedback on your work so far, and some direction on where to go with your revision. It can be really helpful to collaborate with a writing fellow just to get a separate set of eyes on your work. People find it really insightful and helpful to go there. And here are my sources of some of the sample thesis statements. Thank you.